Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
The wind blew as if it wanted to knock her off her feet. Augusta tightened her scarf around her neck. Home. I need to get home quickly. On the way, she stopped at a shop, bought bread and milk. As she left, she stumbled and stepped right into a puddle. Her feet immediately felt the icy dampness. How many years had she been wearing these boots? She bought them even before she got married. Back then, they were the height of fashion, but now they were worn out and leaked. She couldn't afford new ones, and besides, she had more pressing concerns. She just hoped she wouldn't catch a cold. She walked down a dark, deserted alley and thought that about 3 years ago, her life had been happy and carefree. Her beloved husband meant everything to her. Even the discovery of her infertility didn't darken the picture of their overall well-being. After all, the doctors gave hope. She just had to go through a course of treatment. But suddenly, everything shattered into pieces. Pedro fell ill, caught a virus, not a severe one. 10 days later, he was ready to be discharged, and suddenly a blood clot broke off. As they say, trouble doesn't come alone. Right after the devastating news, her mother-in-law, Luz Morales, suffered a stroke. Maybe that's what helped Augusta not fall into despair, gave her a chance to distract herself a little from her husband's death, as she had to take care of his mother. Augusta, a nurse by profession, administered injections to her, changed her diapers, and fed her with a spoon. She truly loved Luz. When Pedro introduced Augusta to his mother, his future mother-in-law immediately treated her kindly. A long-standing educator, she knew how to connect with anyone in any situation. For example, she never made any comments to her daughter-in-law, but delicately gave advice. Or not advice, just expressed wishes. And in cases of disagreements between the young couple, she often sided with Augusta, persuading her son that he was wrong. That's why the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law quickly became friends, managing the household together, going shopping, and having coffee parties while discussing the latest news. And now, it was all over. Luz Morales lay alone all day, completely helpless. And Augusta took extra shifts just to make ends meet. Admittedly, a neighbor, also an elderly woman, sometimes visited her sick friend. She couldn't provide much help, but at least she came, took a look, and that was something. There was no money for a caregiver. Luz's condition had rapidly deteriorated recently. Doctors weren't giving favorable predictions, and they recommended that Augusta prepare for the inevitable outcome. For the first time, she thought about what would happen if her mother-in-law died. She didn't even want to think about it. Of course, after the funeral, and they still had to arrange that, her responsibilities would lessen. But was that really consolation when you're losing a loved one? Her phone rang. It was her sister Marta. Hey. How are things over there? Hey. Still the same. What? No improvements? Nah. Well, okay, I'm still in touch. Call me if anything. There was a hint of disappointment in her tone. That's who had been eagerly waiting for Luz's death. Augusta's sister and her husband, along with their 2 children and their mother, lived in a small 2-room apartment on the outskirts of the city and had always envied Augusta's living conditions. And when it became clear that Luz Morales wouldn't recover and didn't have much time left to live, Augusta's sister attacked her. Listen, think for yourself. Why do you need a 3-bedroom apartment all by yourself? You don't have children and probably won't, but we're crammed into 2 rooms. Let's swap. These conversations were unpleasant for Augusta. Her sister's blatant cynicism irritated her. After all, her mother-in-law was still alive, and Augusta would do everything to prolong her life. But, on the other hand, after Luz's death, Augusta would likely have to give in to Marta. Indeed, her nephews were growing up, they needed space, and 2 rooms would be more than enough for her. Of course, the commute to work would be very long, but what could she do? Augusta went upstairs, turned the key in the lock, entered, and immediately tensed. Sounds were coming from her mother-in-law's room, either crying or sobbing. Dropping her bags on the floor, Augusta rushed in. The blanket was thrown on the floor. Luz Morales awkwardly held the phone to her left ear. Her right hand, paralyzed, hung helplessly. "Don't give away, just don't give away," she was muttering through tears. Augusta carefully took the phone from her hand, but the caller had already hung up. The number was unfamiliar. The elderly woman was in a state of extreme agitation, trying to say something, but only incomprehensible sounds came from her throat. Augusta had to give her mother-in-law a calming injection and sit by her side for a long time, stroking her short, gray hair. Only by evening did they finally find out what had happened. It turned out that Pedro's first wife had died in a car accident, and his teenage son was left an orphan. Augusta knew about her husband's first marriage and that he had a son from another city with whom Pedro hadn't been in contact. He dutifully paid child support, meaning his workplace's accounting department calculated the payments, but he never attempted to contact the boy by phone or on social media. When Augusta asked why, he just waved his hand. "I barely know him. We got married as students, lived together briefly, then went our separate ways. Why would he need a father like me? Especially since his mother got remarried." But it turned out that the grandmother hadn't forgotten her grandson. She secretly maintained contact with her former daughter-in-law, inquired about her grandson's life, and occasionally sent him money. And now, this ex-wife had passed away. Augusta sighed heavily, death again, as if under some curse. And the boy faced the prospect of going to an orphanage. He was no longer needed by his stepfather. And he had no intention of keeping the boy in his living space. Just not to an orphanage. "Don't give him away," Luz Morales rasped, clutching Augusta's hand. I beg you, I beg you." The weak fingers loosened, and her mother-in-law passed away. The funeral and memorial service went according to the established script. Neighbors came to bid farewell to the deceased. The funeral company's porters lifted and carried the coffin. They quickly reached the cemetery, dug the grave, and at home organized a memorial dinner attended only by neighborhood old ladies. Augusta's eyes remained moist. Even though this sad ending had been predicted long ago, and she had mentally prepared for it, death always comes unexpectedly. The only good news, if anything could be considered good in such a situation, was that the school where Luz Morales had taught for many years collected funds for the funeral, so Augusta didn't have to borrow money. "You know what I think?" Marta said insidiously as they were cleaning up the table and washing the dishes late in the evening. She had left her children with their grandmother and came to help her sister. "You don't really have to hold the 9-day wake. Who needs that? Nobody follows those rules anymore. You could just book a hall and order food at the cafeteria, and we'd be ready to move on." "No," unexpectedly firm, Augusta replied. "The 9-day wake will take place right here." "Well, suit yourself," Marta pouted in offense. "By the way, 9 days when? Next Thursday?" "I won't be able to. I have my own stuff to deal with." Augusta didn't sleep all night. She mourned for Luz and thought about the fate of the boy she so wanted to help. And on the very next day, after swapping shifts with her friend Melania, she took a bus to a neighboring city. At the guardianship and custody department, she was welcomed warmly. They were interested in placing as many orphans as possible in new families. Of course, the downside was that Augusta didn't have children of her own. But she explained that she had experience with children. After all, 2 nephews had grown up with her involvement. The female specialists listened to her story about her mother-in-law's last will, and some of them even shed tears. It wasn't clear how Rodrigo, Pedro's son, would react to Augusta's desire to become his guardian. So, they sent her to the orphanage to meet him. Seeing the teenager, Augusta couldn't help but sigh. Rodrigo was the spitting image of Pedro. Like 2 peas in a pod, they had the same face. He remained calm, answered politely, and seemed pleased that a complete stranger wanted to become his guardian. Apparently, the prospect of staying in an orphanage until he reached adulthood scared him more than living with his father's second wife. Augusta talked with the boy and the director, handed Rodrigo some gifts, sweets, and promised to take him soon. The next 2 weeks were hectic. Augusta gathered documents, attended training at the foster parent school, prepared for the memorial service with a lot of help from her neighbors. She visited local guardianship authorities, got to know the curators of the future little family, studied the rules, and received important instructions. Her sister called constantly, but every time Augusta quickly ended the conversation, claiming she was busy. In reality, she just didn't want to share anything with Marta until things were settled. And finally, on the first day of autumn break, she waited for Rodrigo in the director's office of the orphanage. He appeared a bit scared, hunched over, with a school backpack on his back and a couple of bags with his belongings. Augusta's heart twinged with pity, a child left all alone in the world. She hugged him by the shoulders and pulled him close. "It's okay, all the bad times are over. Everything will be fine from now on." And she believed it herself. Meanwhile, her sister kept interrupting her on the phone. "Well, will you finally tell me what's going on?" Augusta hesitated to start the conversation for a while, but there was no point in delaying any further. She invited Marta to a cafe and told her everything, about Luz's last will, about the orphan she decided to raise as her own child, and about the likelihood that Marta's family would have to stay in their current housing. Marta choked with anger. Are you completely crazy? Why burden yourself like this? A stranger's kid. He might turn into some kind of thug. What are you even thinking? Do you have any conscience at all? We've been living out of suitcases for half a month. Instead of gathering all kinds of riffraff, you'd better take care of your own nephews. But it's what Luz Morales wanted. Your mother-in-law was an old fool. She should have taken care of him herself, instead of putting the burden on you, and then she died and that was the end of it. And you just swallowed the bait, you mindless chicken. Do you realize you won't have a personal life anymore? You could have found a man, gotten married, tried to have your own child eventually. And now what? You're 33, a little more, and no one will need you at all. Especially with your looks. It stung a little. Augusta didn't consider herself a beauty, but should she be valued only for her looks? Marta, of course, was prettier and 5 years younger, but to hear such things from her own sister. And she said stubbornly, "I won't change anything. I'm responsible for this child. He's my son now." "So you've thrown all of us away for some degenerate?" Augusta's fists clenched on their own. She had always danced to her younger sister's tune, yielded to her in everything. But endure such insults? Against whom? An unfortunate child? She stood up silently, slammed a bill for the coffee on the table, and left. Swearing and hysterical shouts followed her. Meanwhile, Rodrigo was thrilled with his new apartment. In his stepfather's house, he didn't have his own space, but here, he had his own spacious, bright room, a study area for his homework, and a computer left by Pedro. And in the near future, Augusta decided she should buy the boy a laptop and a new smartphone. But that would have to wait a bit, until she started receiving guardianship allowance. For now, she tried to feed him something delicious every day. The food from the orphanage probably wasn't that great. Rodrigo appealed to her. First, he reminded her so much of her beloved husband, both in the way he spoke and in the habit of rubbing his nose when lost in thought. Even the way he turned his head. Because of this, she immediately began to perceive him as her own. Second, he was well-mannered, well-read, polite, and he tried to help with the cleaning or carried heavy bags from the store himself. Augusta feared that puberty would manifest itself with scandals, disobedience, lies, or even worse. But Rodrigo remained just as gentle, cheerful, and smiling. Of course, he missed his mother, but he quickly formed an attachment to Augusta. It was evident that he lacked warmth and attention. He naively shared his thoughts and dreams with her, making him even more endearing. However, the attacks from relatives didn't stop. His mother called, sighed, and spoke as if she was on the verge of tears. "Augusta, my dear, Marta told me everything. I'm in shock. How could you, just like that, without consulting anyone? Can't you return this child? You're wrong to think that he'll have a hard time at the orphanage. They have professional caregivers and balanced nutrition there." "Well, fine, you took him in. But the two of you can live well in our apartment, and then when he turns 18, he'll be given housing. Besides, you know, Irene and Lino and us are all squeezed into the passageway. Lino just started first grade. He has no place to study. I'm so tired, I sometimes just want to be alone. You understand, health is not what it used to be. His mother was clearly appealing to her sympathy. Mom, if you want, you can move in with us. You'll have your own room here. What are you saying? His mother was taken aback. Marta needs help with the kids. That's why we can only move all together. Well, I'll think about it. Oh, what's there to think about? Why are you such an egoist? His mother was tired of pretending to be a sheep. You too, and us 5. Make a decision faster. Augusta didn't know what to decide. On one hand, his mother was right. The 5 of them were crowded, and she felt a little guilty for depriving her family of the hope for better conditions. But on the other hand, in the end, her doubts were dispelled by Melania. No, really, this is sheer audacity. Her friend declared when Augusta asked for advice. They have no right to your apartment. Yes, but first of all, your apartment also belongs to Rodrigo. It's your grandmother's property, and you both have equal shares. Second, the guardianship authorities won't be pleased that you're taking a child from a luxurious home and placing him in a shack on the outskirts. Third, how will he feel himself? You offered one thing and immediately changed it without asking his opinion. Fourth, you have a school nearby, sports clubs nearby, a children's clinic, and your work is close. And there? Can you imagine how late you'll be coming back in the evenings? No, absolutely no exchanges. They're adults, they work, let them solve their own problems themselves, not at your expense. Melania laid it all out clearly, and it was precisely these arguments that Augusta presented to her sister and mother. She particularly emphasized that the apartment belonged half to Rodrigo and that the guardianship authorities didn't allow a downgrade. These arguments didn't convince her relatives. They yelled and expressed everything they thought of Augusta, how heartless she was, how she deceived them, how she didn't express regret over the little children, how treacherously she acted towards her closest family. And if she didn't change her mind immediately, she would no longer be their daughter or sister. Augusta didn't change her mind, and the relationships ended there. Even when she wanted to congratulate her niece on her birthday over the phone, they didn't answer. But Augusta had plenty of concerns without this. Rodrigo had now become the center of her life. She tried to dress him fashionably, cooked his favorite dishes, worried if he didn't return on time from a walk. She tried to spend all her free time with him. She took him to museums, concerts, amusement parks, and supervised his studies. The boy was a good student, and Augusta was pleased to attend parent-teacher meetings, knowing that he would be praised. How delightful it was for her. Sociable, with an easygoing nature, the young boy quickly found friends both in class and in the yard. Quite often, a group of boys would come over to their house. They would make noise, laugh, argue, play, and Augusta would treat them with homemade orange juice and pastries, feeling happy again. So, for years passed. The guardianship authorities hardly bothered her. Augusta was an exemplary guardian. As always, she opened the door with her key and, entering the hallway, saw women's ballet shoes under the coat rack. Rodrigo had brought a girlfriend over. It was the first time, and she was flustered. Her son was growing up. Rodrigo, we have guests? I just bought some pastries. Shall we have coffee or make cocoa? The young man came out of the room, holding his girlfriend's hand. Cute, Augusta noted. Well, meet. Rodrigo was a bit embarrassed. This is Irma, and this is Augusta. They had agreed from the very beginning that he would call Augusta by her first name. Very nice to meet you. Let's sit at the table, Augusta began, but at that moment, the girl nudged Rodrigo in the side with her elbow. Yes, he blushed even more. Irma will be living here. We're expecting a baby. What? Augusta's legs gave way, and she sank onto the couch. What baby? You're only 16. And Irma is the same age. Well, it just happened. The young man stared at the floor. Augusta tried to compose herself, but she couldn't calm down. The unexpected news threw her off balance. When did they manage this? Why didn't I notice the changes in her son's life? I'm a good mother, no one can deny that. She forgot about the coffee, and the kettle kept whistling loudly in the apartment until Rodrigo went to the kitchen and turned off the gas. How can this be? Does your mother know? What does she say? She addressed Irma. Irma chuckled in response. Well, my mom couldn't care less. And what do you intend to do? We'll get married, Rodrigo sighed. But I want a real wedding with a limousine and a gorgeous dress. Irma stated categorically. For now, I'll go unpack my things. It turned out that there were several bags of clothes and other items belonging to this girl in Rodrigo's room. The next evening, Augusta, having learned a dress from Rodrigo, knocked on the rickety gate of a house in a private sector. No one responded for a long time. Finally, the gate creaked open slightly. Narrow eyes looked at Augusta from a reddish, puffy face of a woman, one eye almost completely hidden under a huge bruise, and the smell of alcohol was palpable even from a distance. What do you want? The woman greeted Augusta, showing her blackened teeth. Augusta was taken aback. Was this drunkard Irma's mother? I'm sorry, she stammered. I'm here about your daughter. And what? The gate didn't open even a centimeter wider. Do you know that she's pregnant? Irma? She's gone too far, the little slut. So what? Who are you anyway? A teacher or something? She finished school already. How could she have finished school? She's only 16. So what? She finished as much as needed. The woman started to move her lips and count something on her fingers. Well, yes. 9 grades, I think. So, what should we do? She's pregnant. We need to put her on a register. What's that got to do with me? She's an adult. I haven't seen that filly for a couple of years. Let her think with her own head. I have plenty of things to do without her, and the gate slammed shut. Well, everything was once again on Augusta's shoulders. Right now, in the middle of August, she and Rodrigo would have been leisurely shopping and visiting school fairs, buying school supplies, going to cafes, eating ice cream by the fountain. But instead, she had to deal with the fate of an almost unfamiliar girl and her unborn child. Their unborn child with Rodrigo. This little one who didn't even exist yet, she already loved. On the first day off from her duties, she and Irma went to a women's clinic, although the girl resisted for a long time. Oh, why bother? I feel fine. Sometime later. But Augusta said that later she would have to prepare Rodrigo for school, and work hadn't been canceled either. She practically had to drag Irma along. Wait in the corridor, the doctor escorted the girl out after the examination. Then she turned angrily to Augusta. 16 weeks. What are you thinking, Mom? Not only is the girl too young, but you've dragged it on until this stage without showing her to a doctor once. With great difficulty, Augusta persuaded the doctor that she wasn't the mother and that she brought the girl as soon as she could. They were given a bunch of referrals for tests and examinations, and everywhere Augusta had to accompany Irma, as the girl didn't want to go anywhere alone. She had to give her shifts to Melania. Her friend agreed to everything and just nodded sympathetically. Oh, you're going to have a tough time with this doll face. The pregnancy was proceeding normally, but one question worried Augusta: 16 weeks. This meant that Rodrigo and Irma had been together for over 4 months. But at the end of the school year, Rodrigo spent most of his time at home. He was on the internet, playing his guitar, strumming his favorite tunes, and didn't seem like he was in love at all. Now his eyes were sparkling. He tried to be close to Irma, touching her hands, shoulders, gently stroking her back, and discreetly kissing her neck when Augusta wasn't looking. But back then, he seemed like a regular teenager, not yet mature enough for romantic relationships. Carefully, while Irma was in the bathroom, she tried to find out from her son how long they had known each other. 2 months and 8 days, the boy answered without hesitation. That was a blow. This meant Irma was a cunning pretender, and the child wasn't Rodrigo's. But how could she tell him that? He's counting the days. And Augusta kept quiet. She couldn't shock her son with such a truth. Well, as long as they love each other and are happy. Dealing with an expanding family on her own was quite challenging for Augusta. Irma was being capricious, demanding shrimp one moment, then expensive tropical fruits the next. Meanwhile, she spent whole days on social media, not even willing to wash the dishes. She'd roll her eyes and clutch her belly. Rodrigo would panic and rush to call an ambulance. Doctors would arrive, measure her pulse and blood pressure, not find anything dangerous, but out of habit would advise her to be careful. Irma would bring up the topic of marriage more and more often. Look, I want this dress. She pointed her finger at an image on the screen. Augusta looked to see the price and was horrified. No, it's too expensive. We can't afford that. We'll have to save up for a long time. Irma put her hands on her hips. I'm not waiting until I get as fat as a cow. You're a guardian, you get money for Rodrigo. Give it to us. It's his money, and you have no right to spend it on yourself. Accusations like these left Augusta breathless. She had always used any allowances and payments on Rodrigo. She never thought to deprive him of anything. Renovations, new furniture suitable for a teenager. She couldn't leave him in a room with an old-fashioned grandmother's dresser. Modern gadgets, quality clothing, and shoes, everything was for him. Yes, the government money allowed her and Rodrigo to live in relative comfort. But for the grand celebration that the son's bride-to-be had planned, it wasn't enough. Especially since significant sums were going toward Irma's needs. She spent so much on underwear and cosmetics that Augusta was amazed. And it all came from her wallet. She had to humiliatingly show the girl receipts for expenses, for new wallpaper, a bed and wardrobe, a desktop computer, and a monitor. And so on. Irma studied them meticulously and finally grumbled. Fine then. But starting from this month, you better start saving for the wedding. Augusta promised, even though Irma's behavior really irritated her. But she wouldn't argue with a pregnant girl. However, soon there wasn't much time to think about the wedding. Genetic abnormalities dangerous for the baby were detected in the future mother, and she was admitted to the hospital for monitoring until the birth. And again, Augusta would daily bring her fruits, buy medications, consult with doctors, and pray for everything to turn out well. The baby girl was born thin and weak, and she spent another month in the hospital being cared for. But when she was discharged, it became clear that the young mother was indifferent to her. The child would cry uncontrollably, and Irma, putting headphones in her ears, would go to another room to chat online. Leaving the baby with her wasn't an option, so Augusta took leave to fully take care of Gloria, preparing formula. Irma refused breastfeeding from the start, bathing her, taking her to doctors, and going for walks. A playpen was set up beside Augusta's bed as well. There were days when Irma wouldn't even come near the baby. Why is she crying all the time? Irma would pout in dissatisfaction. I wish I could give her to someone. Rodrigo, who was sleep-deprived due to the constant crying, also didn't feel any paternal connection to the girl. I think I'm starting to understand my dad, he mused, leaning over the baby's crib. I don't feel anything for her, just like she's an empty space. That's because, Augusta explained, you two started a family too early. You're still children yourselves. It's better if you go with her for a walk. Oh, maybe you can go instead? I really need to sleep. And I have a test tomorrow, I need to prepare. And Augusta would go for a walk. Melania came by several times, bringing gifts for the newborn and scolding Augusta. Look at yourself. You've become so frail. Soon we'll fit you in the window frame. Are you even sleeping? Not very often. I still need to clean up, cook for everyone, and go grocery shopping. You've completely let your youngsters run wild. What are they doing all day? Well, Rodrigo is in the 11th grade. And Irma. Irma isn't doing anything. She's recovering after childbirth. Ah, I see. It seemed Melania was breathing fire like a dragon out of anger. Where are they? They're in their room watching a movie. I'll show them a movie now. She burst through the door, entered the room where Rodrigo and Irma were lying on the bed watching a movie. Without saying a word, Melania slammed the laptop shut. What are you doing? The young couple protested indignantly. Sit up. Melania snapped at them. How long do you think you can mess with Augusta? Have you no shame left? So, Rodrigo, starting today, you'll clean the apartment and buy groceries. But I have homework. No excuses. You'll spend less time on nonsense. Melania tapped her finger on the laptop. But. Silence. And you, Melania turned to Irma, find a job by summer. Until then, you'll do laundry and cook. I don't know how and I don't want to. You'll have to learn. You'll cook and cook well because you're the ones eating it. I'll come over and check, understood? Do you understand me? Understood, the young ones wilted. They had never seen Augusta's friends so furious. Melania kept her word. She regularly visited and inspected the execution of her orders. And if she saw any mess or if lunch wasn't prepared, she would scold them without mercy. Rodrigo and even the cheeky Irma kept quiet. They knew that arguing with Melania would make them pay for this. Augusta's life became easier. True, at first it was impossible to have any decent meal from Irma, but Melania made her promise that she would cook herself. After all, Irma needed to learn how to manage a household. One day, when Gloria turned 6 months old, Rodrigo approached Augusta with a secretive look. Augusta, there's something I need to talk to you about. She followed him to his room, where Irma was sitting in front of the computer screen and beaming. I found adoptive parents for Gloria. They really liked her in the photo. And they're willing to pay $100,000. We can buy a car. Augusta felt her heart racing. What? You want to sell the baby? Have you lost your minds? Do you know that this is a criminal offense? How could you even come up with this? What's the big deal? Irma seemed to consider all of this completely normal. She's my daughter. I sell her if I want to, and I don't if I don't. I need the money. They want the baby. They're childless. It's a trade. No one will find out about it, as long as you don't blab. Irma cast a disapproving look at Augusta. Absolutely not. Augusta was resolute. I won't allow Gloria to be treated like an object. If you don't want her, I'll adopt her. She surprised herself with why this simple solution hadn't occurred to her earlier, considering she was the only one taking care of the baby. When her leave was over, she had to take unpaid leave. The management wasn't happy and threatened to fire her. Thankfully, Melania helped out for now. But by adopting the little one, she would officially have the right to maternity leave. And this girl would be hers alone. Well, take Gloria for yourself, then, Irma snorted. Just pay the $500,000, and it's done. Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? Wherever you want, it's not my concern. Augusta turned to Rodrigo for support. He was a smart boy. Surely he understood that this was wrong. A child wasn't a toy to be given away, sold, or given as a gift. But the boy was still completely infatuated with Irma and did whatever she said. At night, Augusta was afraid to close her eyes, afraid that Irma and Rodrigo would take the baby. Choking on tears, she called Melania. You're never short of drama. Melania declared upon hearing her friend's story. All right, I'll help you. We'll figure something out. The next evening, a call rang out, and Augusta, holding little Gloria in her arms, went to open the door. A young police officer stood on the threshold. He winked at Augusta, and she led him into the room where the young people were. He showed them his badge and, glancing at some paper, sternly asked if Irma and Rodrigo lived here. They only nodded in fear. He then sat down and informed them that his task force had tracked down several individuals who were buying infants and selling them for organs. and these individuals had testified that Rodrigo and Irma were willing to sell their baby daughter. Was this true? No, no way. Rodrigo and Irma exclaimed in unison. We didn't know about the organs. They told us they couldn't have children. We just wanted to help them. We didn't think, we didn't want. Thinking or not thinking, wanting or not wanting, the police officer grumbled. Ignorance of the law does not exempt you from responsibility. Prison awaits you. Irma burst into tears, and Rodrigo struggled to hold back his own tears. Well, there's one way out, the police officer said reluctantly. If, for example, someone from your relatives or acquaintances adopts the girl in the near future, then you'll have nothing to answer for, and we'll let you go. I can adopt her, Augusta stepped forward. Internally, she was amused by the scene. She knew that the police officer was a school friend of Melania's husband and worked as a local officer in another district. Excellent, the police officer walked around the room, took a notebook from the table, flipped through it, tore out 2 pages, and placed them in front of the teenagers. Right. I, so-and-so, agree to adopt our daughter, sign it and put the date. If needed, we'll call you. And remember, I'm watching you. Taking the papers with him, he left. Rodrigo and Irma couldn't come to their senses for a long time. They went about the next day subdued and bewildered. In the meantime, Augusta and Melania went to consult a lawyer, and soon Irma's relinquishment of the child and Augusta's adoption were officially documented. How happy Augusta was, now this tiny girl had become her real daughter, and she felt that she loved her more than anything else in the world. Rodrigo gradually changed his attitude towards her. He began to spend time with her, play, and take walks with her stroller in the yard. You know, he would tell Augusta, it's a good thing you adopted her. I love her like a little sister, but I just couldn't get used to thinking of her as a daughter. What daughter is she to you? Augusta blurted out, but quickly caught herself and bit her tongue. But Rodrigo didn't pay any attention to those words. Gloria grew up like all children, sometimes stumbling and crying, sometimes falling ill. Like all babies, she began teething, then took her first steps and said her first words. In general, everything was fine, but somehow unnoticed, a discord began to arise between the young people. Irma would frequently disappear without explanation, return late, and become rude to Rodrigo and Augusta. She stopped fulfilling her household duties and spent entire days chattering on the phone with someone. And once, when Augusta returned home with Gloria from the clinic, she found a real mess and Rodrigo looking lost and sad. Rodrigo, what happened? Why is there such a mess? Augusta couldn't understand. Did Irma go to her parents? She left me, Rodrigo answered with a lifeless voice. She left. Left me completely. But why? Everything seemed fine. Irma told me everything. She went back to her ex-boyfriend. He was married, but now he's divorced, and they can be together. It turns out she had been talking to him all this time, and I knew nothing. And Gloria is his daughter. She never loved me. Rodrigo waved his hand and slouched, heading to his room. Augusta rushed to comfort him, tried to tell him not to be so upset, that Irma was insincere, deceitful, and dishonest. That she wasn't worthy of him and that he would definitely find a good girl who would love him. She decided not to mention that she knew Gloria wasn't his child. She didn't want to be accused of betrayal. Augusta was worried that if Rodrigo found out the truth, he might treat the baby worse. But that didn't happen. Apparently, he reasoned like an adult, realizing the child was blameless. Irma's betrayal was a heavy blow for him. For several months, he walked around gloomy and downcast. He locked himself in his room, listening to music for hours or turning on a movie, but he himself looked past the screen. Augusta tried to cheer him up, asked him to play with Gloria, help choose an outfit for the baby, or go to the mall together. Gradually, things returned to normal. Augusta's efforts, Rodrigo's naturally cheerful nature, and time did their job. Rodrigo became carefree again, a grown-up boy who had gained bitter experience but was still a boy, as he should be at his age. During all this time, Augusta didn't communicate with her family. Consumed by resentment, they didn't want to see or hear from her. And suddenly, she bumped into her sister near the shopping center. "Is she yours?" Marta stared at Gloria in amazement, who was sitting in her stroller, happily kicking her legs. "Did you give birth? She doesn't look anything like you." Augusta really wanted to say that yes, this was her biological daughter. But she couldn't lie and confessed that she had adopted the girl. Her sister smirked maliciously. "Oh well, go on, gather all kinds of riffraff. As long as it makes our lives worse." Augusta tried to ask about how her sister was doing, about her nephews, about their mother, but Marta turned away and walked off in silence, unwilling to engage in a conversation. Augusta felt deeply hurt, but when she looked at Gloria, who was struggling to reach a hanging branch with a butterfly on it, she laughed and forgot about the unpleasant incident. After all, she had her own family, her children, and that was the most important thing. One day, while walking with her daughter on the playground of a neighboring building, Augusta noticed a young woman with a stroller. In the stroller sat a little girl of about the same age as Gloria. Augusta had never seen them before. The woman sat on a bench, placed the stroller next to her, and was engrossed in her phone. She was fairly attractive but appeared arrogant and haughty. The little girl tried to get out of the stroller but was securely fastened with a belt. She leaned downward, kicked her legs, fiddled with the buckle using her tiny fingers, trying to undo the strap holding her in place, but all her efforts were in vain. Then she let out a quiet squeak. The woman, who had paid no attention to her until now, still focused on her phone, suddenly jerked the stroller so forcefully that the girl's head swayed from side to side like a rag doll. The girl fell silent and just looked sadly at the other children happily playing on the playground, filling the air with their cries and laughter. Augusta felt sorry for the little girl. Could you treat a child like this? She wanted to rebuke the negligent mother, but who was she to interfere in someone else's parenting process? After sitting in one place for a whole hour, the woman got up and pushed the stroller away. Augusta scolded herself for not having the courage to say something to her. She reassured herself that perhaps the child wasn't entirely healthy, maybe she couldn't walk. But it was a feeble consolation. She started seeing this pair every day now. It was the same story repeating itself, the woman immersed in her phone, the girl glancing around with sad eyes. Sometimes the girl pointed somewhere and tried to say something, but the woman paid her no attention whatsoever. Augusta's heart ached at the sight, but she still couldn't bring herself to approach them. So what if she scolded the mother? What if the mother retorted with spite and told her to mind her own business? And then what? It wouldn't help the child. However, on a weekend, Augusta unexpectedly saw the same little girl at the playground. This time, she was with, as Augusta understood, her father, a pleasant-looking man, tall, slightly plump, with a kind demeanor. He didn't take his eyes off his daughter for a single second. He pushed her down the slide, tossed her a ball, spun her around, and showered her with kisses. She laughed heartily, ran around, and appeared perfectly healthy. Augusta approached the man and, feeling a bit embarrassed, struck up a conversation. "Is this your daughter? What's her name?" "Carla." "And yours?" "Gloria." "I hadn't seen you here before." "Yes, we've recently moved to this area, and we like it here. Our house is over there. It's so wonderful to see how much attention you give Carla while you're out. Unlike your wife, who always has her strapped in the stroller as if she's tied down." Augusta's thoughts shifted. Well, there you have it, she had spoken up, maybe even meddled. "No, you've misunderstood. I don't have a wife, and a nanny takes her out. She doesn't let her go? I'll deal with her." His gaze turned serious, and his voice became firm. Augusta calmed down. The dad won't let his daughter be hurt. And indeed, from Monday onwards, the nanny, seemingly with reluctance, took Clara by the hand, pushed her on the swings. With an unhappy expression on her face, but Augusta was happy for the little girl. On the next Saturday, they met again, Clara's dad with his daughter and Augusta with Gloria. He waved from a distance and smiled widely. Augusta noted to herself, what a wonderful smile he had. "We're waiting for you." The man handed Augusta and Gloria a candy. "We didn't even introduce ourselves yesterday. I'm Christian." "I'm Augusta." "A beautiful name that suits you very well." This compliment both embarrassed and pleased Augusta. She was glad that Christian found her appealing. They played on the playground, and then Christian suggested taking a walk. "You know, there's a pond with ducks not far from here. Shall we go?" Augusta gladly agreed. The fluffy floating bundles of feathers delighted the little girls. It was a challenge to get them back into their strollers for the trip home. Only the effects of the fresh air and running around managed to almost lull them to sleep. Augusta and Christian walked alongside each other and talked. They started with small talk about the weather, then discussed city news, and finally their own problems. Augusta felt like sharing everything that concerned her with this person. She told him about her husband's passing, about her 2 kids. She decided not to mention how she acquired these kids. What was the point? They were like family to her anyway. She spoke about Rodrigo's troubles, how he had broken up with his girlfriend, and how difficult that had been, but now things seemed to be improving. She also mentioned how Gloria had health issues from birth. But Augusta was trying to follow all the doctor's instructions, and she hoped that Gloria's immunity would recover and all her illnesses would disappear. Christian listened attentively, asked questions, and Augusta answered willingly. They continued walking until they reached her house. As they said goodbye, Christian said, "Shall we meet again tomorrow?" "Of course," Augusta replied, not even realizing the enthusiasm in her voice. The next day, bringing some bread with them, they went to feed the ducks again. On the way back, it was Christian's turn to open up. Actually, Augusta prompted him. "I talked so much about myself yesterday, I probably bored you. Today, maybe you can tell me about yourself?" "Absolutely, I promise to give you a full account of my life." "Ask away." Augusta hesitated. She didn't want to appear tactless, but one question particularly interested her. "Your wife, did she die?" For some reason, Augusta had thought that Christian's spouse had passed away during childbirth, and she was ready to offer her condolences. "No," Christian raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Where did you get that idea?" "She's alive, she just left us." "What?" Augusta was taken aback. "And Clara?" She could understand a woman leaving her husband. Although what had Christian done to deserve that, she couldn't even imagine. But leaving a child? "Let's sit down," Christian pointed to a bench. "Let the girls nap, and I'll tell you." They sat down in the shade. "I'm much older than my wife. I fell head over heels in love. She never experienced any denial. I fulfilled all her whims, outfits, cars, jewelry. She never worked. When Clara was a year old, we decided to leave her with my mom and go on vacation. Italy was open at the time, so we were headed there. But at the last moment, my company got into a mess, and they didn't let me go on leave. My wife had to go alone. There she met a local young Italian, they fell in love, she came back and demanded a divorce. But what about your daughter? She said she probably wouldn't be able to handle the responsibilities of motherhood and, in general, she didn't need any extra baggage, she wanted to start anew. She packed up and left. Since then, I haven't heard anything about her. I hope she's happy there with her Italian. And she never called or inquired about how her daughter is doing? No. They were silent for a while. Finally, Augusta gently stroked Christian's hand. She wanted to console him. Do you still love her? Does it still hurt? He covered her hand with his, not taking his gaze off the pond in the distance. No. I won't deny it. At first I hoped she would come back. I was even ready to forgive, but now, that's all in the past. My mom helped me a lot. She looked after her granddaughter when I got buried in work, spent nights at the office, didn't want to come home. Then I realized I had to keep living for Clara and my mom. Now it's hard for my mom to cope with the child, she's getting old. So, I decided to move here to the city center. Sold the old apartment, bought a new one, and started a new life. Christian forced a smile, but it came out feeble and forced. Augusta tried to lighten the mood and said in a cheerful tone, "Yes, it's so nice here. The neighborhood is green. You did everything right. And this nanny, where did you find her? At a personnel agency? Does she have an educational or medical background?" Mom found the nanny too. Felicia is her old friend's daughter. She doesn't have any specific education, but they figured she could handle taking care of Clara, even though she doesn't have any kids herself. She's divorced. After all, it's not a stranger, and entrusting a child to a stranger is scary. So when we moved, I hired her. I'm only at home on weekends. Honestly, Christian chuckled, I think they wanted to set us up because my mom keeps hinting that I should take a closer look at Felicia. It's funny. Augusta didn't find it funny. For some reason, the thought that her new acquaintance might direct his attention to another woman hurt her. She wanted to tell Christian that Felicia treated Clara poorly, she spoke to her rudely, constantly scolded her. But she considered that this comment might appear as an intentional attempt to tarnish the nanny's behavior, so she kept quiet. Right at the entrance, Christian held Augusta back. I want to let you know that tomorrow is Clara's birthday. I invite you and your children. I took a day off work, and I'll give the nanny a day off too. We'll have fun together. And please, let me have your phone number. They exchanged numbers, and Augusta, almost on cloud nine, headed home. She was so delighted, as if she had been invited on a date. In the evening, she called her friend Melania to get some advice on what gift to get for the girl. The conversation dragged on, as Augusta wanted to share everything about Christian. Are you in love, girl? Melania chuckled. All I've been hearing is Christian, oh, Christian. Oh, come on, don't say that. Augusta blushed. We just have kids of the same age and live nearby. That's how we became friends. And besides, he's going through a tough time alone. I want to support him. So what? Can't you fall in love? Is that bad? You're both single, why not give it a try? Stop it. We're just getting to know each other. Still, think about it. Maybe you should get to know each other better. She thought until almost morning. Christian appealed to her, kind, reliable, and loves children. She sensed some sympathy from his side too. Well, what should she do? Try to make herself even more likable? Emphasize her virtues? Show herself as a great mother, loyal companion, and excellent homemaker? Strive to appear intelligent and thoughtful? No, not at all. Artificially trying to win favor was just as false as outright deception. Let things go as they go, she would remain herself. And Augusta fell asleep. The next day, following Melania's advice, she bought a beautiful dress and a wobbly toy for Clara. Rodrigo flatly refused to accompany them with Gloria. What am I, a little kid, going to a children's party for? But he secretly went to the store and added a box of child-safe modeling clay and an air balloon to the gifts. Though, the balloon had to be left at home because Gloria clung to it and refused to let go. She reluctantly agreed after some persuading, saying that the balloon would wait for her to return. Christian opened the door with a smile, wearing a clown hat and an apron with frills. Here, I'm roasting chicken in the oven for the first time in my life. But for now, let's have some cake. The birthday girl liked the gifts, especially the toy that rocked and spun, producing melodious sounds. Christian placed the cake on the table, and Augusta gasped. Its entire top was covered in huge, poison-red cream roses. What on earth? Can kids eat something like this? It's pure margarine. But the kids were convinced they could eat it and reached out for the cake with their hands. Distract them, Christian whispered. While Augusta tried to capture the children's attention, Christian deftly sliced off the roses with a knife and carried them to the kitchen. The cake without its main decoration looked odd and worn, but it still tasted delicious. The girls were served large pieces of sponge cake, and they started enjoying the cake, washing it down with juice. Parents watched the little ones and were amused until a smell of smoke wafted in from the kitchen. Chicken. Christian rushed to save the festive dish. Nothing serious happened. The chicken was only burnt on the bottom, and the top remained perfectly edible. After enjoying the legs, the sweet didn't spoil their appetite at all. The children started watching cartoons. Augusta and Christian finally managed to sit down at the table. "Let's have some wine," Christian suggested. "I have a light Remoulade Blanco." They toasted to their children's health, ate, drank juice with cake. It was time for the kids' midday rest. The girls were laid side by side on the couch, and they soon peacefully fell asleep. Augusta and Christian whispered quietly to each other. Then the doorbell rang. Who could that be? "I'm not expecting anyone," Christian looked puzzled. Augusta heard him open the door, and she immediately recognized Felicia's cooing voice. Apparently, she could not only bark orders at Clara, but also make her voice sound sweet and affectionate. "Oh, I thought I'd drop by to congratulate Clara, our little beauty. Here, I brought a gift." "Thank you, but she's sleeping now." Christian seemed a bit embarrassed. "Well, I'll wait until she wakes up. I have the day off anyway," and Felicia entered the room. Seeing her, Augusta's eyes widened in surprise. The nanny usually wore jeans and t-shirts, but now she was wearing a gorgeous semi-transparent dress that accentuated her graceful figure. Her makeup and hairstyle seemed to have been done by an expensive stylist. Awkwardly trailing behind her was Christian, holding a box tied with a red ribbon. "Have a seat, Felicia," he mumbled. "Here's a little cake." "The table's a bit messy." That was an understatement. The table resembled a battlefield, crumpled napkins everywhere, half-eaten candies and apples left by the kids, chicken bones, and a partially destroyed cake. But Felicia wasn't interested in the table. She twitched slightly upon seeing Augusta. Her face flushed, she turned abruptly and rushed to the hallway, throwing words of apology on the way. The door slammed shut a second later. "What's with her?" Christian asked, bewildered. "I gave her the day off. She could have minded her own business." And Augusta understood. Felicia had dressed up and come because she wanted to spend the day with Christian. On workdays, they only saw each other in the mornings and evenings, passing the child back and forth. She recalled Christian's comment about how his mother and friend thought of Felicia as a potential wife. She realized that Felicia had her sights on Christian. Augusta felt a pang of jealousy. But Christian didn't suspect anything and waved it off. If she left, she left. Maybe she's busy. The gift was unwrapped, revealing a plush teddy bear. Then, they cleared the table together, did the dishes, and Augusta couldn't help thinking about the feeling she had upon seeing Felicia. She was surprised that Christian had become so important to her that she didn't want to share his attention with anyone else. The next day at the playground, Felicia, walking Clara, walked past Augusta as if she were a void, not responding to the greeting. And when the little girl reached for her friend, Felicia lifted her up and carried her away, ignoring the protests. Since then, she preferred to walk elsewhere. "Well, there's your rival," commented her friend Melania. "She's got her eye on him, for sure. Men like him aren't easy to come by. How long has she been working for him? A month. And look, she's already staking a claim on his freedom. Watch out, don't let this pass you by." Augusta nodded. She shared the same view. She and Christian continued to meet only on Saturdays and Sundays. But now they talked on the phone every evening. Their topics became deeper and more varied: music preferences, movies, thoughts on contemporary political situations in the world, favorite authors, whether green energy could restore the climate on Earth, and so on. They joked, laughed, argued. Sometimes they even fought, but each evening ended with a wish for a good night. On one of the Fridays, Christian asked, "What are your plans for tomorrow?" "Well, nothing special. Rodrigo and I will clean, then go shopping after lunch. I still need to do laundry." "Why?" "Let's do this. Do the laundry today, postpone cleaning, we'll shop tomorrow after lunch, and tomorrow morning, I invite you and the kids to visit my mom. Bring your son, The cherries are ripe. Do you like cherry jam? Augusta felt that, even when preparing to meet her potential mother-in-law, she had never been so meticulous about what to wear and how to do her makeup. She really wanted to make a good impression on Christian's mother. Rodrigo tried to avoid the trip, but Augusta appealed to his sense of duty. They needed to help the elderly lady pick cherries. After all, he's a man, not an old lady climbing trees. When they all went out together after breakfast, a huge black SUV was waiting by the entrance. "Wow!" Rodrigo exclaimed. "Is this your car?" "Yeah," Christian simply replied, helping Augusta settle into the car with Gloria in the back seat, where Clara was already sitting in her child seat. "Do you like it?" "Awesome." "Oh, by the way, we need to get a car seat for Gloria too," Christian continued. Augusta remained silent, as if she hadn't heard, but she felt a warmth inside. He spoke as if they were already a family. Rodrigo took the front seat, and throughout the drive, they and Christian talked about cars. Augusta didn't know that her son was so interested in them. The weather was beautiful. Due to the early hour, the highway wasn't as busy, and after about 40 minutes, they arrived at a large house in a private area. Christian opened the gate, drove the car into the yard, and everyone got out. A woman came out onto the porch and waved her hands. "Christian's here." But upon seeing Augusta and Rodrigo, she stopped. A displeased expression appeared on her face, as if to say, "Who are these people?" "Mom, let me introduce you. This is Augusta, her children, Rodrigo and Gloria. And this is my mom, Ida. And here's my Clara, my sunshine." Christian's mother seemed to ignore her son's words. "Why didn't you bring Felicia?" "She's off today," Christian dryly answered. "You mentioned you needed help picking cherries?" "I do, but I wasn't expecting guests. I have nothing to offer," and she, holding her granddaughter, entered the house. Augusta stood there feeling disheartened. Right now, she wanted to run out to the street, stop the first passing car, and go back home. She saw that Rodrigo was also uncomfortable and awkward. Christian understood their state. "Don't pay attention, my mom has a strong personality. But it's not a big deal, you came to visit me, not her. So, feel free." Indeed, this Ida was completely lacking the tact of Augusta's beloved mother-in-law, Luz. It became clear right away that Ida didn't like Augusta, despite her modest clothing and light makeup. "Okay, Rodrigo," Christian started giving instructions to ease the situation. "Take Gloria and pick some cucumbers in the greenhouse behind the house. Just don't eat them unwashed." Augusta managed to shout after the kids. "Rodrigo, make sure Gloria is okay. And you and I will talk." Christian led Augusta closer to the gate and looked at her seriously. She responded with a puzzled look, wondering what important matter he wanted to discuss right now. "Why does Rodrigo call you by your name? I heard in the car how he addressed you." Augusta hesitated slightly before answering. "Because he's not my biological child, he's my husband's son. He was left an orphan, and I took him under my care. He couldn't call me mom, his own mother had just died, and he was already grown up. So, we decided he would just call me Augusta." Augusta paused and then decided that if she was going to tell the truth, she might as well tell it all. "And I adopted Gloria, she's Rodrigo's former girlfriend's daughter. Listen, you're a hero, taking on the responsibility of 2 children. You're amazing. It might sound pompous, but I'm proud of you." Christian hugged Augusta and patted her back, and she found herself encircled by his arms, freezing in that moment. Just then, Rodrigo and Gloria emerged from around the corner with their hands full of cucumbers. Augusta stepped away from Christian. "So, what about the cherries? Are we going to pick them?" Christian brought a ladder, a couple of buckets, and he and Rodrigo got to picking the berries. Augusta wandered around with her daughter. She could see Ida watching her from behind a curtain. The woman thought she was hidden, but the sun was shining directly through the window, illuminating the contours of her bent body. Augusta felt uncomfortable and went behind the house. But just then, the observer moved to the same side, and there was nowhere to hide from her gaze. Finally, the cherries were picked, and Christian put one bucket in the car. "This is for us. Now, let's go to the table and have a little snack." Neither Augusta nor Rodrigo wanted to enter the inhospitable house, but Christian insisted. He went to the fridge, took out some sausage and butter, sliced bread, and brewed coffee. His mother watched, lips pursed. And when he took out 2 jars of baby meat puree, she pounced on him like a vulture. "I bought that for Clara." Augusta stood up from the table, but Christian motioned for her to sit back down. "That's fine, we'll feed Clara and Gloria now." Grandma fed Clara, while Christian fed Gloria, all the while sipping coffee and munching on a sandwich. Augusta felt a lump in her throat. The sharp eyes of the hostess seemed to be counting how many spoonfuls of sugar were added to the coffee, how many bites of sausage were taken. When they finally finished the meal and started heading back, Augusta felt immense relief. Instead of a farewell, Ida shouted to her son, "Bring Felicia with you next time." "My mother wasn't always like this," Christian explained on the way. "It's just elderly stubbornness to have things her way. I don't give in, but I also don't argue much. She's still my mother." Augusta remembered her own mother and felt really sad. She had tried to reconnect with her family many times, but they had cut her out of their lives. "Why doesn't Uncle Christian ever come to our place?" Rodrigo asked when Augusta stood over the pot, stirring jam. And indeed, why not? It was all because of Rodrigo himself. Augusta didn't know how to explain her new acquaintance to her son. She was afraid he would be against it. But now, after Rodrigo and Christian had properly met, it was obvious they had liked each other. "Well, now that the jam is ready, we can invite them for coffee." And the next day, Christian came with his daughter, and he solemnly handed Augusta a box of cookies. Augusta had prepared everything, a salad, a main course, and baked a pie. Christian praised the dishes and the hands that had prepared them, and Augusta blushed with pleasure. She knew that Christian mostly ate at the canteen near his office. After lunch, he turned to Rodrigo. "Listen, will you help me with fixing my Jeep? There's something rattling there, and I want to take a look." "Yes, of course." The boy almost choked with happiness. "But I don't really know about these things." "That's okay," Christian laughed. "I'll explain everything." And they went to the parking lot where the car was parked. Augusta stayed with the girls, played with them, kept them occupied, and thought that handling 2 little ones was not so hard for her. Unlike the lively Gloria, Clara was calm and undemanding. The son and Christian returned content. "How are things going?" Augusta asked. "Fixed it," Rodrigo proudly replied. "There was a minor issue." "Yeah, Rodrigo helped me a lot." Christian's eyes sparkled with a smile. From then on, she heard from her son, "Uncle Christian this, Uncle Christian said that, Uncle Christian is coming over." Augusta understood that the teenager had always lacked a fatherly presence, a male shoulder to lean on. To the smart, attentive, and caring adult, he had opened up his heart. Now, Christian and Rodrigo would talk for a long time, discussing everything under the sun, from the football championship to the country's political situation and their future professions. Video calls with Augusta continued until late at night. One of those conversations was suddenly interrupted by the doorbell at Christian's end. "Wait, let me go answer that," he disconnected. Augusta waited for a long time, expecting him to call back, but the phone remained silent. She didn't dare call herself. Maybe something had happened and he was busy. She could barely wait until the next evening, but Christian didn't mention anything. He behaved as usual. Maybe someone from the neighbors dropped by? Augusta's curiosity was getting to her. Seizing the moment, she casually asked, "Who came to you so late yesterday?" Christian suddenly looked embarrassed, averted his gaze, and started explaining guiltily. "You see, it was Felicia, well, the nanny." "Yes, I remember who Felicia is." "She came to you at night?" "She went home after work, But it turned out that some distant relatives unexpectedly showed up at her place, a whole crowd of them. Well, they had a party till morning, and she had nowhere to rest, so she decided to come to me. Augusta snorted. It was all quite obvious, a made-up story. Poor girl had nowhere else to spend the night. She had no friends and no good acquaintances. It's amazing how gullible and oblivious men can be. If it were her, she wouldn't have fallen for such a trick. Well, you have an extra room, don't you? She slept on the couch, and I made a bed for myself on the balcony. Is she staying over tonight too? Augusta noted that her tone had become sarcastic and annoyed, and she scolded herself. After all, she had no right over this man, in essence. But there was a gnawing feeling inside her. No, no, Christian hurriedly said. Not at all. I gave her money for a taxi and sent her to her mother's place. Of course, these two snakes will find a way to connect. Augusta was burning with indignation. And yet, she was relieved that Christian had put a stop to it decisively. It meant he wasn't planning to get closer to Felicia. Something needs to be done about this. Her friend Melania firmly stated. If the nanny has started making moves, we need to take action too. What? What can I do? Augusta's mood was sour. She's meeting with him every day, taking care of his child. I can't just kick her out, can I? Well, why don't you take over her duties? What do you mean? Oh, shame on you, it's not a rocket science. Just become the nanny for his daughter. What's the difference to you, looking after one girl or two? Augusta froze in surprise. Become Clara's nanny? Why not? She remembered that she had looked after both girls a few times. Granted, not for a whole day. Still, she couldn't say that she struggled greatly with them. How should I propose that to him? Very simple. Tell him that you could take his daughter under your wing. What if he thinks I'm jealous of Felicia? How would he think that? You've told him that there's nothing between you. You're just friends. Emphasize that the nanny isn't treating the girl well. That's true, right? True, Augusta sighed. But what if he doesn't believe me and thinks I'm deliberately badmouthing her? For several days, she couldn't summon the courage. She weighed her strengths. Taking care of two children wasn't the same as taking care of one. Kids grow, become more active, you need to keep a constant eye on them. And if she failed, how would she look Christian in the eyes afterward? Hey, I tried looking after your child, and if it doesn't work out, well, here, take them back and do as you please. Yet, the fear of Felicia's succeeding in luring away Christian was doing its work. Walking on the playground on a weekend, Augusta made up her mind. Look, she addressed Christian, who was smiling while watching the kids play in the sandbox. How the girls have become friends, how they enjoy being together. That was true. Clara and Gloria had become so attached that when their parents separated them to go home, they would cry their hearts out every time. And the parents would have to lull them to sleep with tales and promises of a meeting tomorrow. Yes, they're like real little sisters, Christian said with a smile. If you want, I could take care of Clara. So, what do you mean? He looked interested. Well, feed her, take her for walks, put her to bed, read her books while you're at work. But there's Felicia. Augusta played her last card. Felicia, she stammered, doesn't treat the girl very well. She yells at her, scolds her. And, overall, she's not suitable for Clara's upbringing. Trust me, I've seen how she treats her. Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? Christian grew concerned. This is unacceptable. Lately, she hasn't been here for walks. She takes Clara to a different playground. I don't know what they're doing there, but I doubt Felicia has changed her behavior. Christian thought for a moment, then patted Augusta's shoulder. I'm grateful that you care about my daughter. And I'd be glad if you took care of her. But are you sure you can handle it? I wouldn't want you to be exhausted by evening. You'd burn out quickly. Rodrigo will help me. I think he'll agree to share some of the responsibilities. Well, okay then. Tomorrow morning, I'll bring Clara over with her things, toys, spare clothes, fruits, and other food. I'll settle things with Felicia, and you'll receive her salary. But on this point, Augusta wasn't prepared. He might think she's in it for the money. What are you saying? No need. Why payment? I don't want anything. I won't take it. She protested. What do you mean won't take it? I understand that in our situation, talking about money is uncomfortable. We're not strangers, we're friends. But I also can't burden you with the care of my child for free. So, I'll transfer you some amount monthly. I'll make the first transfer today. You can use that money to buy groceries, other things. Including for Clara. Basically, spend it as you see fit. That's it, I won't agree to anything else. And if you refuse, everything will stay the same, and I'll constantly worry that Clara is with someone who doesn't love her and mistreats her. Fine, Augusta nodded. Let it be that way. That same evening, a substantial amount was transferred to her bank account. Christian had clearly lied and added a quite significant sum to her salary. Augusta felt embarrassed. Well done, man. Melania was pleased. You can tell he's a decent person. Don't even think about refusing and acting all high and mighty. What, you're going to handle everything on your own? Men are wary of strong women. You know me, how independent I am. I can fix a faucet and do repairs myself. But I'll never show that to my husband. Let him think he needs to protect and cherish me. This will be your shared money, for Clara, for Gloria, for Rodrigo, for you. And you can use some of it to buy something for Christian, clothes or whatever, like in a normal family. And Augusta gave in, but promised herself that she would only spend the money Christian gave her on the children. She talked to Rodrigo, and her son was also happy with the changes and guaranteed his help. Now he enthusiastically crawled around on the floor with the girls, building blanket forts, laughing as he fended off their attempts to tickle him. Augusta looked at him and thought that he was essentially still a child, just a little older. Now Christian was a frequent guest in their home. He would drop off Clara in the morning and stay for dinner and conversations in the evenings. He would only leave when his daughter was beginning to nod off. After some time, Augusta asked how Felicia had taken her dismissal. Christian grew serious. Of course, she wasn't happy. It was a big unpleasantness for her. She was very hurt, cried, begged me not to let her go. I felt sorry for her, so I didn't even bring up the accusations of poor performance. I paid her double salary. I hope she'll find a new job quickly. Augusta decided not to tell him that, walking with the children, she had seen Felicia from a distance for several days. Deep down, she sympathized with her, understanding that she had received an unexpected blow. But then Felicia disappeared, and with her, it seemed, all the troubles vanished. Life continued its course. Rodrigo was already in his first year of university, and he was doing well. Clara, following Gloria's lead, soon started calling Augusta Mom. Gloria herself adored the new little sister and shared her toys and candies with her. Augusta was coming back from the store. The wind was tugging at her coat, and she remembered how on a similar chilly autumn evening she had hurried home to her dying mother-in-law. So many changes had taken place since then. She had 3 children now. She had met Christian. But his attitude towards her still disappointed her. Now they spent a lot of time together, but he didn't make any attempts to get closer. Augusta was afraid that years would go by, her daughters would grow up, and she and Christian would still just be good friends. She hesitated to take the first step, to show her love. She now knew that she loved Christian. Too deeply ingrained in her was the common belief that in romantic relationships, everything depended on the man. Although even in school, she had been taught that women could also take the first step. Approaching the house, Augusta shifted her focus to more immediate problems. She needed to make pancakes. The kids loved them. She had some sweet jam for the filling, and her men wouldn't say no to the delicious treat. As she entered the building, it was dark. Augusta had just thought that another light bulb had probably burned out when suddenly she lost consciousness abruptly. Perception of the surrounding world returned slowly. First, through her crusted eyelashes, a cold daylight penetrated, then voices rang out, echoing in her brain like a distant drumbeat. She couldn't quite make out the words, her head hurt wildly, and she felt dizzy to the point of nausea. She sensed a prick in her arm, but she couldn't muster the strength to move. She didn't know how much time had passed, but gradually her mind began to clear. "Augusta, Augusta." A persistent female voice called. Augusta struggled to open her eyes. It felt like her eyelids were made of lead, and with every moment, they seemed to want to close again. "Augusta, look at me," a deep male baritone echoed. She saw a figure in a white coat before her. "How do you feel?" "Go OD," a hoarse sound escaped instead of an answer. No, she didn't feel good at all, but she couldn't go into explanations of where and what hurt. Everything hurt, and she wasn't capable of it. She wanted them to stop bothering her with questions so she could sink back into sleep. A heavy sleep, full of dreams, would relieve the nausea and dizziness. But the doctor wasn't planning on leaving her in peace. "Do you remember what happened to you?" She wanted to shake her head negatively, but the movement felt like someone was thrusting red-hot pokers into her brain, and she groaned. "Fine, rest. Nurse, bring." After that, Augusta couldn't hear anything more. When she woke up again, weak sunlight was filtering through the window. "Well, how are you?" A young nurse greeted her. "Thank you." "I'm fine," Augusta whispered. In reality, she was significantly better. It was just her head that reminded her of its presence with a dull ache. "Where am I? What's today's date?" "I'll call the doctor right now," the nurse responded illogically, as if she herself couldn't answer such simple questions. Soon the doctor appeared, the same elderly man with the pleasant baritone. "Waking up, my dear? It's time to start feeling better. What happened to me?" "You have a traumatic brain injury." Augusta raised her hand and touched the bandaged head. It felt as if she were wearing a helmet made of bandages, leaving only her face exposed. "What happened?" "Your neighbors found you lying on the floor in the hallway. You received a blow to the head from a heavy object. Your wallet with money was missing from your bag. Your relatives reported it. Everything else was still there." "Did you see the attacker?" "No. I was lost in thought. There was no one nearby. But it was dark. I don't know who it could have been." "I see." The police officer tapped his fingers on the edge of the bed. The rhythm transmitted to Augusta's head, and she winced. "You see," the man continued, "the attack on you appears to be a simple robbery. It could have been committed by anyone, some thug or a teenager from a troubled family. There are no witnesses, no evidence. We probably won't be able to find them." "Was there a lot of money?" "No, not really. I usually pay with a card. The card wasn't stolen, and there were no withdrawals from it. So, should you file a report? Just imagine, you will be bothered, questioned, and the result will be 0. "All right, I won't file a report." Augusta grew tired of the conversation. "Well, here we go." The policeman perked up. "I wish you a speedy recovery." And he left. Immediately, a nurse entered the room. "Your husband and son have come to see you." "Oh," Augusta bustled. "Do you have a mirror?" "Yes." The nurse held a small mirror to her face. Augusta looked and was horrified. Her skin was as pale as paper, dry lips, a pointed nose, and dark circles around her eyes. She wished she hadn't looked. Just then, Rodrigo rushed into the room. "Augusta, how are you? We were so worried." He gently touched her cheek, tears in his eyes. Following him, with a worried expression, came Christian, holding a bouquet of flowers and a bag. "Finally, you're awake. We were so anxious. Does anything hurt?" "Just my head a bit." "Have I been lying here for long?" "You were unconscious for 4 days, then a week in the ICU, and today is the first day they allowed visitors. Here," Christian rummaged in the bag, "fruits, chocolate, cookies. Tomorrow we'll bring something more substantial. Rodrigo and I have learned to cook. Oh, yeah, Rodrigo smiled. Just tell us what you want, we'll make anything. You're both so wonderful. Augusta reached to pat her son's head, and he leaned in to hug her. Suddenly, Augusta felt a rush. What about Gloria? Where's Gloria? Why haven't you brought her? And I've missed Clara. Christian made a calming gesture. Don't worry, both of them will be here tomorrow. We were told not to talk to you for too long. They're being watched over. By whom? Well, Christian hesitated. We had to turn to Felicia again. After all, she has experience, and Clara knows her. And Gloria is used to her too. What? Augusta exclaimed, ignoring the pain. Get me home immediately. She tried to get up from the bed, but her head immediately spun, and she lost her sense of direction. It felt like the room was spinning at a furious speed. Christian barely managed to catch Augusta and lay her back down. Just then, the attending doctor walked in. Well, what's with all this jumping around? Discharge me home. Absolutely not. You still need another week of bed rest and treatment. And you, young people, he addressed the visitors, out of here. You've agitated my patient. No. Augusta groaned and cried. I need to go home. Augusta, I brought you a phone. We'll call each other as often as you want. And you'll see Gloria today. Believe me, everything will be fine. Christian kept talking, trying to dispel Augusta's anxiety, until the doctor practically pushed him out of the room. Augusta leaned back on the pillow and bit her lip. She didn't trust Felicia. She had seen how Felicia treated Clara back in the day and didn't want her daughter to suffer the same fate. But what could she do now? She felt utterly helpless, unable to even stand. Soon, her phone vibrated, a video call from Christian. He positioned the phone so that Augusta could see the room. The little ones were huddled around him, looking healthy and cheerful. He sat them on his knees and, addressing each one alternately, asked questions. How was your day? Good? Yes. They both nodded. What did you have for breakfast? Come on, remember what you had in the morning? Porridge. And for lunch? Soup. Delicious soup? Dad cooked it himself. He shot a proud look at the phone. And now we'll have pasta. Did you go for a walk? Did you swing on the swings? Yes. Well, there you go. Augusta wanted to talk to them herself. Oh God, how she missed her dear girls. But she understood that they wouldn't recognize her in her current state, and worse, they might get scared. All right, her main task now was to follow all the medical staff's instructions and recover as quickly as possible. In the evening, Melania called. Auguste, are you feeling better? They won't let me in, only relatives. What can I bring you? Oh my, how terrible. She pressed her palms to her cheeks and shook her head, seeing Augusta's face. May that monster who attacked you never know happiness in his life. To maim someone over something so trivial. Augusta calmly thought about the missing money, but as for the wallet, she was heartbroken over it. Her mother-in-law, Luz Morales, had read somewhere that according to feng shui, a wallet should be red, and she had knitted one like that for Augusta as a gift. It was big enough for unfolded bills to fit easily, richly decorated with beads and rhinestones. It caught everyone's attention in stores. It was hard to look away from such beauty. Maybe the criminal thought there would be millions in such a wallet, but Augusta remembered very well that she hadn't even taken the wallet out of her bag. A few days later, they removed the bandage. Augusta felt a huge scar on the back of her head, where her hair had been shaved. The scar hurt only when it was touched. And then, the day of discharge arrived. Christian came to pick up Augusta alone. I took unpaid leave. I can't leave you alone right now, you're so weak. Augusta was indeed struggling to move her legs. She held onto Christian's elbow, and he gently supported her down the stairs. In the lobby, he picked her up and carried her to the car. Resting her head against his chest, Augusta heard his heart beating. In the car, she looked at herself in the mirror and snorted. Well, there you go, a beauty. The circles around her eyes had almost faded, but her skin was pale and even a bit bruised, her hair sticking up from lying down for so long. And here's the beauty. Christian leaned towards her to fasten her seatbelt, unexpectedly planting a kiss on her lips. And he didn't pull away until Augusta responded to the kiss, sending shivers down her spine. She hugged Christian, and they kissed for a long while. Then they smiled at each other and headed home. At home, cleanliness and order awaited her. You should lie down for now, Christian advised her. You need to conserve your strength. The doctor said, no strain, no stress, and no negative emotions. I'll park the car and bring the girls. They'll be so happy. But he returned bewildered and with only Clara. And Gloria? Augusta perked up and started to rise. Just don't worry, Christian looked flustered. After those words, Augusta's heart sank. Gloria fell ill, an ambulance took her. What's wrong with her? Augusta clung to Christian's arms, not noticing that she was scaring the little girl. I don't know, Felicia said everything was fine, and then Gloria suddenly collapsed and lost consciousness. Does she have any allergies? No, she doesn't have any allergies. She intentionally poisoned her. Augusta broke into tears. Following that, as if waiting for this, Clara burst into tears. Christian tried to calm them both down. Finally, Augusta fell silent, immediately followed by Clara. Clara climbed onto Augusta's lap and used her little palms to wipe away the tears on Augusta's face, while Augusta, through sobs, kissed the tiny fingers. They took her to the third children's hospital. Let's go. Christian ordered. Medication poisoning, the doctor startled them. It's of moderate severity, but we washed her stomach. She'll need to follow a diet and take medications for a while. But thank God, we managed in time. Just a bit more and it's scary to think about. Tell your grandmas and grandpas not to leave their blood pressure meds lying around anywhere. But we don't have grandparents, Augusta replied. And nobody takes blood pressure medication. So she found them somewhere. Maybe when visiting. And she managed to swallow a few pills. Her liver is affected, but we'll hope for the best. Gloria slept in Augusta's arms, her face looking pale and troubled. When they put her in her crib at home, she didn't wake up. She just turned over and settled in more comfortably. Clara seemed to sense that something was wrong with her sister. She didn't throw a tantrum and let herself be put to bed too. Rodrigo returned from his activities, was happy to see Augusta, but became stunned when he heard the news about Gloria. She won't die, right? His voice trembled. Everything will be okay, won't it? She'll recover? Christian hugged him by the shoulders. Of course, otherwise she wouldn't have been discharged. And now, let's feed Mom. She's become so thin in the hospital. After lunch, Rodrigo went to his room, and Augusta and Christian whispered quietly so as not to disturb the children's sleep. It's her, I know it. Augusta whispered urgently. She hates me, that's why she wanted to hurt me. Why would she hate you? Because she's in love with you. Augusta almost shouted in a hushed voice. Christian was surprised. Really? What a silly thing. I don't need her even for free. But, by the way, she lives with her retired mother, and she could easily have high blood pressure. Well, let's go see her. Having instructed Rodrigo to watch over the girls, they got back into the Jeep. Felicia, like Christian's mother, lived in a small house in a private sector. Christian honked, and a plump woman in a warm shawl came out at the honk. Christian. Her face lit up with a smile. What a joy! You here to see Felicia? Wait a moment, she went to the store, she'll be back soon. You can come into the house, I'll treat you to some pie. Augusta sat in the back seat, behind tinted windows, invisible from the street. Thanks, Isabella, I'll wait for her here, Christian declined the offer of pie. Torturous minutes of waiting dragged on. Finally, at the end of the street, a slender figure appeared. Augusta unintentionally admired her light gait. She was indeed beautiful. Felicia recognized Christian's car from afar. She rushed over and dove into the open door. Only then did she notice Augusta. The happy smile slipped off her face, but she tried to maintain composure. "Let's talk, Felicia." Christian had a somber look, and his voice didn't bode well. "Why did you give the child your mother's medicine?" "What medicine are you talking about?" "I didn't give her anything." "Maybe she picked something up on the street?" Felicia tried to jump back outside, but the door was locked. "The doctors told us the name, and Isabella just confirmed that these are the same pills she takes for her blood pressure." Christian lied. "What are you doing? You better realize you're about to have a beautiful jail time." Felicia's heart raced like during a seizure. She began to beg, in a humiliating manner, not to involve the police, crying, asking for forgiveness. It was unpleasant to look at her. Her behavior aroused a feeling of disgust. "Get out of here, scum." Christian unlocked the door. Felicia lunged towards the narrow gap, and her bag flipped over, fell to the ground, its flap opened, and Augusta couldn't believe her eyes. A beautiful red wallet, adorned with rhinestones, beads, and sequins, fell out of the bag. Augusta picked it up. "This is my wallet!" She shouted so loudly that a dog barked somewhere in the yard. "So it was you who almost killed me, huh?" Christian grabbed Felicia by the sleeve and pulled her back into the car. "No, no," she weakly protested. "I just found it." "Let me be curious, what were you doing in Augusta's building at that time?" Christian's tone became subdued and menacing. "Now you have 2 sentences against you. You won't prove anything." Felicia was crying. "I'm not guilty. I found the wallet on the street." "Fine," Christian responded wearily. "The police will handle this. Get out of here." Felicia quickly jumped out of the car. Feeling relatively safe, she grew bolder. "Give me back my money." Augusta opened the window and shipped the contents of the wallet right onto the dirty road. Felicia cursed and gingerly used her manicured fingers to retrieve the soiled bills. Then, with a bitter smirk, she hissed maliciously at Christian. "So you slept with me and decided to stay with her?" The Jeep jerked into motion. Glancing back, Augusta saw Felicia crouched over a puddle, picking up coins. Christian was driving like a madman, and Augusta remained silent. She couldn't process the final words she heard from Felicia. So, they had an intimate relationship. And she, the fool, believed that he liked her. That perhaps things could work out between them. And he had been deceiving her. Augusta's head began to throb. Back in town, Christian parked and turned to her. "Augusta, I'm sorry, I'm at fault here. I didn't want to upset you, didn't want to talk about it. Remember that evening when she showed up at my place and asked to stay the night, claiming relatives had suddenly arrived?" Augusta stayed silent, but her heart constricted, so this is when it all started. In the middle of the night, she started crying. I got up, went to see what happened. I leaned over her, and she hugged me and pulled me close. She was completely naked under the blanket, and I couldn't control myself. I didn't want it to happen, but it did. I'm sorry. I couldn't care less about what happened between you two. Take me home. The kids are already awake, Augusta replied in an icy tone. Christian's expression was utterly defeated. That same evening, Augusta poured out her sorrow to her friend. So what? Melania calmly responded to the new information. There was nothing between you two back then, and he had no obligations towards you. That's one thing. How long has he been without a woman? Since his wife left him? Imagine how hard that must be for a young guy. That's two. And obvious provocation is the third thing. You know, I'm not even sure about my husband if I were to sneak a naked beauty into his bed while he's half asleep. So, don't dwell on this nonsense and don't torment yourself. You know that this Felicia means nothing to him, otherwise he would have been with her by now. Augusta considered her friend's points. After all, Christian had cared for her so much, worried when she ended up in the hospital, tried so hard to help. Could she forgive him for a momentary lapse? Especially if he deeply regrets it? But still, it hurt and weighed heavily on her, and she couldn't answer that question. The next morning, the phone rang. "Hi. Can we come over with Clara?" Christian cautiously asked. "I wanted to make breakfast." "Better not. We'll manage on our own." Augusta wanted to respond with a touch of bitterness, but her reply came out differently. "Of course, come over, we're waiting for you." Christian arrived, elated and happy, with a sleeping Clara wrapped in a blanket. "I didn't want to wake her up," he muttered, "just picked her up like that." He carried the little girl to her room. "I still don't understand why you took her home yesterday. She could have slept here." "Well, yes, of course," Christian stammered. Clearly, he didn't want to recall yesterday. "And I don't understand why you have to leave for the night." Augusta continued. "Why not stay here, with the kids and me?" For a moment, Christian thought he misheard. But Augusta looked at him with such love that he rushed towards her, embraced her, and began to kiss and whisper tender words in her ear. They kissed until they heard Rodrigo waking up and heading to the bathroom. "I love you," Christian softly said. "I'll go feed Rodrigo, he has classes at the institute soon." He left, and Augusta was left with a dreamy smile on her face.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.